post-lunch, we've had many names for this session. Scientists ruin art, art meets science, and finally we sort of landed on a more neutral perceiving the world. This will be a unique session in the Science in the City Pavilion. We have no moderators, and we are hoping that it will be a conversation, a samvad apparently is the word in Hindi, between scientists and artists. The first scientist that I have here is Shrikant Bharadwaj. Shrikant is a scientist and network associate director, Brian Holden Institute of Optometry and Vision Sciences at LVPEI. What that means is he runs visual optics research at LVP, and his lab wants to understand all the complexity of the eye's optics and how we generate spatial and depth vision. So he's the vision scientist on this panel. Then we have Priyanka Srivastava. Priyanka is the principal investigator at the Perception and Cognition Lab at IIIT Hyderabad. Her team investigates the determinants of human perception and thinking ability, and they use emerging technologies like VR and AR to understand how our brain is wired. We then have, she's the cognition scientist who's interested in understanding the signals that the eye processes and passes it on to the brain, right? So the artist that we have is Sameera Maruvada. Sameera is an Instagram artist who goes by the Insta handle Salt and Sambar. If you are not following her, please follow her, she's fantastic. Sameera's art also works as social commentary, and her visual storytelling has many fans. Her art lands with a bite, as you will see in the work here, and she questions social mores or draws upon nostalgia. And the final artist, Priyanka Aelay. Priyanka is a contemporary visual artist with a PhD in film studies and visual arts. Priyanka's art is rich with dreamy, dense foliage, as you can see, and a lone animal motif. Priyanka is also on Insta, you can also find her there. Sameera and Priyanka, you are the artist interlocutors. Please come on to the panel, please. And without further ado, let's begin. Over to you, Shrikant and Priyanka.
Thank you, Teja. This is, before we actually get into the guts of things, I thought I should put a context for why we are here. What are our scientists doing amongst artists? And the purpose of doing this has been sort of in the works for several years now. The idea is many of us as scientists try and understand how do we actually see the world, and art being one of the pieces that we all enjoy seeing things. So how do as a vision scientist, when I look at art, what sort of features do I look at? And I'm going to talk about how the brain is going to break down this art into its component features, and how does it sort of build up things again, right, for us to see things the way we are. Priyanka, from the introduction, we knew she's a cognitive scientist, so she starts looking at the emotional aspect of the art. What sort of emotions do we perceive from that art? What leads to happiness? What leads to sadness? And two of us are going to do this from the beholder's eyes, right? And of course, the creators are here, and they are going to tell us about what inspired them to actually do the artwork. What did they think about when they create the art? And in our background conversations, we had some fascinating discussions about this, and we hope to actually communicate some of those to you today in the next half an hour or so. So Sameera, we will start with you, and in a minute I'm going to start showing slides of the artwork that is displayed here. This is the actual art pieces that our artists have created, but for explanation's sake, I'm going to put the slides also. And these discussions we are going to have with the slides in place as well, right? So Sameera, go ahead, and then I'm going to start the slides. Yeah.
Is this working? Okay. Hi everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming here. I'm really looking forward to this session. We are actually going with some of my works, and I assume the scientists are going to dissect it. And I can't wait to see what's going to happen. So we'll start with the... Cool. Yeah, sure. So I'm a cartoonist, and Salt and Sambar is my page on Instagram. Most of my comics are about my home, my family, and also the world that I see around. I perceive the world in a different sense, and there's so many questions in my mind that what's the reason things are the way they are, and yeah, that's what my work reflects.
Priyanka, when you look at an art, something like this, what sort of, so this Priyanka, sorry, there are two Priyankas. So Priyanka 1, Priyanka 2. Yeah. Yeah. So Priyanka, when you look at an art, something like this, what sort of thought processes first come into you? And when you start to put the emotional angle to it, then I will try and break this down into the component features. Yeah.
So the way when I look at it, when I'm looking at from the viewer's point of view, no, one of the things that I felt that the artist is doing very wonderfully is that the artist is actually starting to have your attention to from the point that can you please switch off the lights to go down like this. So you are going by zigzag to figure out what's happening there. And you see the face there, the expression that, you know, you have been asked to switch off the lights. And then until, you know, so far so good, it's going well. The moment you go there, all of it's off. And then you see something bizarre happening there. And that's the fun part that you get it. And then this statement that you come back here again, youth these days. And it brings a smile to you. So when I look at it, you know, how as a viewer you get to this fun. You get to this fun aspect of when you are going through it. And if I look at it, it will be two aspects that is happening there. One is that, what is that you're expecting out of this when you started and you're getting at the end? And the other is the effort that you're going to put in. So the more the effort, the more the delay in realization of that fun would be. The lesser the effort, the more the fun you would realize. So it's artist then, the job is to actually negotiate between your expectancy and the effort that they would like to put in. Right, so that's where I would like to go and see that, you know, how they are coming to realize it.
So for me, when I look at this, right, all I see are figures. Some are circular, some have an angle to it. So I start thinking about, okay, when images like this actually fall in the retina, and now our eye is really only a light capturing receptacle, and it converts this electrical signals, and all of the processing happens at the brain, right? And when an image like this falls on the retina, one of the first things that the brain does is it breaks it down into 3 or 4 fundamental components. The curvatures of each face that you actually see there, the overall brightness of the image, the left image is brighter than the right image, and very nicely Sameera has also put together a sense of 3-dimensionality in this. This is a 2D scene, and in that she has created a sense of 3-dimensionality. So for a minute, if we look at this, just by changing the color of the background from a very bright background to a dark background, she's very vividly conveyed that the sense is now of darkness, and our brain is very, very smart at perceiving the differences in light levels and making inferences out of that. So that to me is the first information that I gather. And the second is, notice how she has used these 2 very simple lines that are just drawn to indicate that this is actually a train scene, and in a train scene there is 3-dimensionality. And you will, the one end of the scene is where the exit for the train is, and you are sort of looking at the whole scene from where we are standing, right? And the second thing she has also done is the stairs that she is using to climb to go to the upper berth, they are not flat on you. They are actually at an angle. So she has created a little perspective, again very crudely, and using that you are able to very clearly say that this is actually a 3-dimensional scene. And lo and behold, you know, Sameera's people even in the 14th century, 13th century, the artists, they have actually used these kinds of clues to actually send a sense of 3-dimensionality. You know, those of you who have traveled to Europe and you have seen the big paintings on the churches, they all have used these kinds of clues to actually convey a sense of 3-dimensional. So, as much as we use our 2 eyes to see the world in 3-dimensional, as artists, they use it remarkably, these kinds of clues to actually convey the sense of 3D. So, to me, The fundamental information in this is the breakdown of that information into circles. There are neurons in the brains that actually capture these circles. There are fine details and then there are coarse details in the image. The eye of each of these people are very, very fine details. The face itself is a very coarse details. There are neurons that breaks those down, and you end of the day, you end up getting this mishmash of information that is formed in the visual part of the brain. The visual part of the brain is behind. It's called the occipital cortex, and that's where the first stage of processing happens. So, Sameera, I'm not sure if you have thought about your paintings this way, but at least as a vision person, this is the first thing that comes to my mind. So if I move to the second one, so let's see what happens there. All right, this is yet another one of your stings. Go ahead.
And maybe we would like also spend some time to, read this, and then Sameera can talk about it, because it's something really interesting.
It's called If Men Menstruated. It's like a whole panel of...
Sameera, if you could come a little closer.
Should I come here? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. I think mostly my job as a cartoonist is that I see a lot of complexity in life, and I try to make it so simple in a 2D cartoon that even every stroke matters to me. So I like to simplify things a lot. That's the most difficult part in my job, I would say. And this one is a series called If Men Menstruated that I did a while ago, and I don't know, I kind of feel weird talking about my work. I feel like the work should speak for itself. So I'm up for whatever people have to say about it.
Okay, so Priyanka, you would like to say something here?
Hi, I'm Priyanka. To begin with, thank you HLF and the science team for having us today. I don't know if I can comment on another artist's work, but it's extremely, because I do extremely complex and a lot of color. So it's quite different for me to sort of visualize anything in monochrome, but I as a person enjoy anything which is in black and white. So for me, I think to go back to the vision, for me it begins with black and white first, and then probably, like you said, maybe then it goes to 2D and what the figures are doing. Probably I as an artist would again, sort of go back to think how simple is it to imagine very complicatedly. Like, being a complicated artist, so I like a lot of complexity in my work. I like extremely dense things. There's a lot of drama, there's a lot of play, there's a lot of subconscious elements that I enjoy. So for me to sort of go back to a contrary image of very simplistic forms is again very interesting, definitely. And the subject is extremely political, so yeah, I think there's a very important social element in what Sameera does, and it's very important that we all get to sort of think and really process of why it is important to have something like this on stage today.
Can I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things with such work I get to see is that, when you are, the way Shrikant did talk about that, you break down into colors and lines and contours and things like that, but then at the end of the day you laugh at it. How you come to that laugh, how you come to that smile, how you come to that realization. And when we are talking about political or the social value, the value is one thing that helps us to realize the smile that we have with reading this, right? Now here what is very important, I believe when we read, men and women possibly would relate to it very differently. The reason is also that how we were and how we are dealing with the world. So very interestingly, that the social value it brings, it also brings us to talk about openly that has never been a part of our conversation. It's also is a taboo, the stigma that is associated, and it's bring a lot of emotional turmoil to women when they undergo through this. Now this cartoon on the other hand brings the glory of it. It glorifies, it's kind of brings the, that how if men are menstruating, then the world would be very different. It would be talked about, it will be celebrated, it would be, enjoyed. On the contrary, what happens today? So that's something is very interesting from the emotional point of view, that, how the two different gender would relate to it, and it's the context is of their own experience and the society that has trained them to look at things, experience, and the word that we are talking about, perceive about certain things. So that's where I would like to.
So for all of that complex emotions to come up, right, the brain now has to reconstruct the scene. Remember where I left is it has broken it down. It has broken it down into its component pieces, and it now has to put things together for us to be seeing the world that we are seeing, right? So what sort of rules does the brain use to actually reconstruct scenes? So some of you may have already heard this is what designers use this called Gestalt principles. So the brain in fact uses a lot of these Gestalt principles to say which one should belong together as a single object, which ones are two distinct objects in the space, right? So if you look at this, probably one of the immediate things that stands out are the red patches, right? Of course, Sameera wants to convey blood and all of that through this, but to me it's like, oh yeah, that's a super nice cue that the brain has. For now to say, okay, anything that is red there, put it all together into a single patch, right? And it also has other Gestalt cues like continuity. So if you look at the photo frames, those photo frames are contiguous features. There's no gap in them. So that's a good cue for the brain to say, okay, that must be a single scene. Let me put that together, right? And it goes through this process of slowly rebuilding that scene and to give us a very vivid representation such as what we are doing. Bear in mind that this is happening almost at an analog scale, right? We are not seeing this world as patches and patches, but it's continuously sort of doing it. So stream of photons come in, breakdown happens, and the reconstruction almost instantaneously sorts of happens. So before I think all the emotional aspect that the brain can deal with, the reconstruction part of it becomes an equally important component in my mind. All right, let me go to the
So I would like to bring another point to this, because we are talking about men, women. Even we bring women to the part of to share their experience or understand what this particular cartoon is depicting. Not all ages would resembles to this, right? So you need to have some level of experience that you have gone through. Maybe some women may not, because they might not have been shamed about that what is going on. And then there are different cultures that exist, the way periods or menstruation has been celebrated or shamed about or used as a stigma to talk about. All of them would trigger different things. So Shrikant is talking about that, how brain process this. So the moment what Shrikant is talking about, the visual processing ends in particularly is when we are talking about visual sensory system, then there is an aspect in brain particularly that deals with how you're evaluating this information. And then you put a label to it that whether this is good, this is bad, this is pleasant, this is unpleasant. And then that leads you to think about certain things. So you may possibly feel agitated, your body responds to it, or you feel relaxed and then your possibly the heart rate would go down and you feel relaxed about it. So that's kind of experience also happens when I'm engaging with something like that, when I'm smiling and appreciating something.
Yeah, so this is one of the most loved comics, probably in my entire career. So this is a typical Telugu family scene. So I'm from Vizag, by the way. I'm a proper Telugu girl. I know my attire and hairstyle speaks different, but it says, for those of you who can't understand Telugu, it says, Ratri kem chenu, as in, what do I cook for dinner tonight? And the people in the house are like, dosa, puri, fried rice, and mom is like, I'll make upma. So, over to you, Shrikant.
And the beauty is you eat upma. Like no choice.
That's typical of moms that every, I think, family experience. But this strikes me to another thing that, again, the men-women roles in family define. And it's mom who always offers you to think about things, and particularly of the food and the care that happens in family. And then you also request, demand from your mom more than your father, though the world is changing, but if we look at advertisement, movies and cartoon, all this is showing the reality that we experience.
So one of the things when you are going through a multi-panel, for cartoon like this, right? What information you have to process depends upon where you are looking at, right? So now, if I am looking at, let's say, the leftmost panel, because of the way our retina, the back of the eye is constructed, everything else is going to appear very blurred to you. So you obviously have to move your eyes to look at objects that are of interest. Now the question is, in a pattern like this, what are your objects of interest and where would you be looking at, right? So not this particular one, we actually used a couple of Priyanka's paintings and we put people in front of an eye tracker. Okay, you look at this painting and we will track your eyes to see where you are looking at. Now 2-3 very interesting features came up. One is, people always look at only the high fidelity information, the eyes, the spectacles for instance in the dad's face, and maybe the text, because that's what they have to interpret to make sense of it, right? The background, that green that is there, are all the less fidelity information. The shirt in that guy, very, very little times people will even fixate on it. And that makes total sense because of all the information that the brain is constantly getting. It can't possibly process every bit of information. It's only said that only 10% of the information that actually reaches your brain actually gets processed. The remaining 90% pretty much gets distilled out. So there is a focus of attention that the brain has to give in order to process it and then get to all the complex thinking that it has to go through, and that complexities will all lie in the high fidelity information. So the next time you are examining a painting, you think for yourself, where are you actually fixating on things? I'm going to come back to this in the context of Sameera's, in the context of Priyanka's paintings also. So hang in there with that thought. Yeah.
Very important point that we pay attention to something which is a high fidelity, the face particularly. If you look at it, even if you don't say that what task you have to do, the first thing we do is to look at the face, because of the value it has again to social connect. That that gives you a lot of information for you to interact and process emotion of the other person, predict that what the other person is thinking, and then accordingly you can strike the conversation. So that's also is an evolutionary perspective that you have while you're engaging with someone. Yes.
So maybe very quickly, can you go back? Very quickly, what's your favorite thing?
Yeah, it's my favorite. It's close to my heart. It's about how a person cherishes her mom's sari. It's like the journey of a mom's sari. It's kind of handed down to the generations, and it's like the story of a sari basically, and how the girl connects to it. Yeah.
You don't look it as just a sari, but once I think Sameera was sharing one very interesting thing. So she posted this 2 times, one without a context, the bigger context that Mother's Day as a celebration happens. So she posted just like that, and it got appreciation because you are relating to it, okay? But then it's also emotionally striking to you because it is not just the sari, but a lot of other network is getting on. Then your memories of mom, how you relate to it, how the warmth is another emotion that you will experience, though it is not doing anything in action-wise for you, but you still feel that, the warmth that you feel. So she posted again on Mother's Day. And then it got a huge applause and appreciation, which was not similar to the earlier one. So something that is a bigger context brought the feeling more strongly for you than without the context to think about. So context plays a very important role. And it has been very interesting for me when I think about emotion, that how that is playing an important role to a thing, that how am I going to perceive what Shrikant is talking about, or what I keep studying is that how am I attending to something? That does my emotional state has any role to play that I would be attending to something differently, and 2 of the people belonging to 2 different states would see the same thing differently. So that's the reason the menstruation, the reason possibly they Again, someone who is utilizing sarees would relate to it way differently than those who may not, right? Again, possibly I believe the gender would have a role to play here too.
The context that Priyanka is speaking about, I think it's a great segue to go from artwork of Sameera to other Priyankas, because hers is a lot more abstract kind of work. And what you are going to interpret out of that is completely dependent on the context, on the frame of mind that you are in. And I'll come back to the eye movements part of it in just a bit. So if we can go to the next slide. Yeah. So Priyanka, that's you.
Yeah, so like what sir has said, you know, it's on the other side, I'm extremely simple and my brain is very simple. So it cannot function a lot of things at once. So as an artist, when I start to do, like I think particularly I would say I and not say we, because every artist is different again. So when I start to do something, it's like I don't really sort of process a lot of things, like how we, at the end, like how sir is probably going to talk to you on the next slide, like how your eye movements and, you know, all of the science behind it. But I think as an artist, like we, like, you know, it's more of the process that I enjoy, and it's almost similar to the viewer. Like I really don't know what the final work would look like, because I don't really have a sketch that I follow. Like, you know, it differs from an artist to an artist, because there are artists who sort of do figurative, and they do have lines that do particular color filling, and you know, the eye is sort of concentrating on particular color designs or the breakdown of colors when you sort of do a sketch or something. But again, for my work, it's very abstract, because I don't really know what I would be doing next, because I enjoy the process, and because of the details that I also do, it doesn't allow me to sort of use anything like a sketch. And I don't really enjoy, you know, like sketching, erasing, or reading back to sketch. I don't do that. So for me, it's a lot of color play, and it's a lot of movement, and it is also the subconscious thoughts that I have at that particular moment. Like I sit with a work, and like an overall thought of where it is going and why is it coming, that I sort of have an idea. Like for example, that work in special, like it's a vague memory that I have from one of the travels that I did to a forest, and there was this very beautiful moment in the early morning that I went for a safari, and you know, that sort of stuck, and it was with me because I as a person enjoy the density, and also I enjoy the rain, dew, and moments like that. So at that particular minute in the early morning, that light, you know, it was an austere moment for me, which I carried back. Like I came back to the studio for a couple of months, it was in my head, and you know, I think I sort of do work that sort of reflects my memory again. So yeah, I think for me again, the moments and what I think and what I take back, everything is important. And the significance of just having one fauna in the whole density is again, it's an individualistic approach, because I don't like enjoy doing figurative because we already have a lot of people around us, so that's not my fun part, but I really enjoy doing animals and their emotions. But symbolically, I'm actually showing people through fauna. So that single fauna that's actually playing there is also a person that I relate to and could also be me. So I sort of take back that there, and that's why you see a bright focus of the fauna popping out of the density in most of the works, even in this. I enjoy doing the silhouette because I want that to stand out. I want the vision, at least for me, to begin with, to start looking at the fauna first and then the density. That's about it.
You know, whatever Priyanka said is a very scary thought to me. And the reason is, as a scientist, me, Priyanka, and several others that I know in the audience, we like to break things down. You know, break it to a point that it's so boring that, but you are super clear about what do you want to really do in your next steps. You won't take the next step in your experiment or in your study unless the hypothesis is very clear, unless exactly what you are looking at is very clear. And here is Priyanka saying, no, it's all subconscious, it just happens to me, and then there is this beautiful art that gets created. But now from a vision scientist point of view, I look at it, I mean, the richness of the art that is there, the myriad of colors that is there, the complexity of the shapes that are there is actually fascinating to me. Because again, in the mishmash of things that the brain has to break it down, now it goes through a lot more complex operations to figure out which feature should belong to which, right? So one feature in this, the fox, is very clear. I mean, that has very vivid colors. It has, everything gets grouped together into that fox. But everything else, how does the brain even do this? How does the brain even process this edge? And it says, okay, all of this should belong to one. So that's a very complex operation that the brain goes through, and oftentimes there are instances where the brain actually breaks down. It cannot actually process this, and you get into things called visual illusions. Many of you may have actually seen this. The most common one is the face and the vase illusion. Sometimes you see the face, sometimes you see the vase, and that's because the brain is unable to say which feature belongs to which and which feature belongs to the background. We call that in technical terms as a figure and ground segregation. So the figure ground segregation is becoming a lot more complex in patterns like this. So yeah, Priyanka, from your side, what would you think looking at a painting like this?
This is complex, and I would like to take from the figure ground part, because as a viewer, we strive for meaning. We strive for something that you can relate to. And figure is something that gives us the meaning very promptly compared to when we think about the background. Background is something that is away from you, and you tend to push it away and try to understand what figure is telling to you. So when we break it down to the level where it's sometimes, kind of mismatch, the one thing that helps us survive is where my intention to look at it, where my goal is to look at it, okay? And that goal can also be defined by the context, the possibly my predisposed state of mood, and then I started appreciating and I go one after the other. Is that sequential all the time? No, but then it has to be also like, you can think about the theater spotlight kind of thing that, if you want to highlight an artist on the stage, then you are focusing on that, and rest of the things are kind of blurred for you. And that's how you start making sense of that particular area. That's where what I study is attention plays a very important role. Your system would collapse if you don't have this very important system working for you. So that allows you to integrate all these things together, and you move ahead, and then you are looking at it again. And then that's how your scanning is going on. That's what Shrikant has captured in eye tracking. And I'll stop here, and then I'll come back to the emotion part. But one of the very interesting things that Priyanka was talking about is, the fox here and the stag there is one in the forest. Now, at times it feels bizarre. At times it feels very solace, peace, that you relate to it in many different ways. Like for instance, as I was talking about the predisposed state, I am as of now not been able to think clearly, and this becomes like a noise to me. And top of that, the stag all alone is scary because it gives me the feeling of isolation, it gives me the feeling of, contrary to solace, is the unsettling feeling, compared to I am trying to find meaning for my life, the purpose, and then this changes the whole meaning for myself. So what Priyanka was sharing, that I was traveling in forest, and then that's how I experienced. So many of her painting was giving me that feeling that I'm just enjoying the greenery, I'm just enjoying the landscape that is there. And often then the state of mood changes because you're also getting the sense of safety there, you're getting the sense of peace there. So yes, Shrikant, you bring the eye tracking part because
if I may, like amidst all this complexity, the way I interpreted this is that there's a whole jungle, there's a lot of nature over there, and if that light source can be seen as mobile or internet, all the fox is doing is just ignoring the nature and just looking at. And the irony is that all of us are also focusing on the fox and the light first, ignoring the nature around. So yes, that's how I'd see it.
And that's exactly what happened, Sameera, when we did the eye tracking. So we did the eye tracking in two contexts, right? We had 4 or 5 people look at paintings like this, not this very particular piece, but other pieces were very similar. There was one fox and then there was a foliage around. We asked people to look at it in two contexts. One is, just free viewing. I'm not going to give you any instructions, just look at it. And in the other instance, now start making meaning out of it, right? Start thinking about what does it mean. One, the pattern of eye tracking is completely different in people, right? When you are free viewing, there is a lot more sort of moving things around. They are looking at one feature, another feature. Don't spend enough time on any particular, feature. But the first thing that they go to is that bright fox, and in that case will be the stag there. When you ask them to make meaning out of it, the time that they spend on the fox is a lot more. They are now trying to figure out what does that mean, what does it mean in the larger context of things. So the fact that you are able to objectively look at somebody's eyes where they are pointing out gives us a lot of information about what kind of processing may actually be happening in somebody's eyes. And in fact, Priyanka does that in the context of her research on patients with depression and stuff. So you may want to quickly just talk about that, Priyanka. I think
This depression is when I was talking about that, how your predisposed state, and particularly when the emotion regulation becomes a difficult part to look at it. So it's not just the emotion, but the ability to regulate emotion is a very critical aspect, what I study. And then that helps me to look at that when I am trying to make sense out of it, and it appears to me pleasure experience or rewarding experience versus it appears more aversive, punishing experience, that's how I'm going to now label my emotion to it. So emotion could be a cognitive aspect that I'm looking at. And before that, I'm attaching value to it. The way I attach value to it, it changes the way I would be appreciating the painting. So often it happens that these kind of paintings are, by the way, an interest to me because I give this to people to say that how it makes you feel. This is what we have done to the other group when we were interacting with them. And then they give us that, what it makes them feel from scale 1 to 9. 1 is where it is very least or unpleasant, extremely unpleasant to extremely pleasant. Now this is one aspect you are giving me, but then I would also like to know how you come to realize this, how it became pleasant, extremely pleasant to you. And I give the features to you that, whether it is peaceful, it is sort of safety that you're seeing life there. So for instance, the forest also gives you an essence of that life is possible there, right? So greenery is actually giving you that experience. Now, often it has been seen with the depressed population that Shrikant was indicating towards, is that they have this low tendency of experiencing rewards. So one of the experience they do talk about is the anhedonia, where they lack seeking pleasure or lack experiencing pleasure to something that they have been invested before. And that is happening because my reward to punishment value assessment has been changed. And therefore the labeling has been changed. And yes, then that can be seen in eye tracking because then it is more effortful process that I'm getting at.
I just got these two words because they actually fit in my car, but otherwise. So the larger words that I have, they do have a couple of other fauna also. It's a lot of times I feel everybody has a medium to sort of express themselves. Like some do writing, some do dance, some do music. So me being an artist, I think this is also a tool for me to express what I think and what I am in specific. But also I do really work on other, socio-political elements that I place my fauna because I do work on things like deforestation and things where, but they're very playful because I feel art can sort of provoke you in a lot of different ways, but I feel my art has to bring that joy and peace into the space where it's been put because that's how I see my work again. So there are fauna placed in particular ways into the painting for me because I think that's also the way where you want to see yourself in. So it could, like subconsciously again, like I do not sort of have a breakdown pattern of what I am actually doing with my work, because I enjoy the process and I don't really believe in having a plan. I mean, we do make plans for everyday living, so this is that one medium which allows me to just be myself, so I don't really enjoy the plan. So if you see, this is on the top, the stag is on the top because I think that's where it's looking the world from. So probably at that moment when I was doing that work, maybe my state of mind was something else. Like, it was not in between a lot of chaotic things, and I think that's because I placed it there. Again, to that, on the contrary, I placed the fox in between the density because, the lifestyles that we are in at the moment is so hectic and so busy, and we have a lot of things going on. The digitalization of the world has put up, there are a lot of people, there's a lot of things that's happening in the daily routine. So I really enjoy taking a moment for myself. Like, I don't, like, it's not that I like to be lonely. I can't eat a meal all alone. So I like people, I like everything about people, I like everything about sharing, but again, after so much chaotic things in a day, I really like to go back to a corner of the window, sit with a book, I like to write something. So it's more like individualistic approach to what I do. So I think the placement of the fauna, and I do a bright color or a silhouette image exactly again for the representation, because I want the viewer to start looking at from there, because that is oneself. So that could be an individual you or individual somebody else. So I want that to stand out of the density, and that is the reason that it's always bright and silhouetted, and the image always wants to pop out of the density. Yeah, that's about it.
That's something. The way I see this is that it's like the brain, and there's this neural pathways over here. I mean, I'm not a science person at all, but please don't bash me. But I see that as when we watch the dopamine hits on the top, and amidst like all of this chaos over here. I mean, I'm a spiritual person too. I see that as, probably the spiritual eye, or the ultimate purpose of life, or the soul, just there, just waiting for us to like see it in the end.
Yeah.
So
We have an artist converted into a scientist now. So I was seeing the vertical section of the hippocampus. And then there is all these neurons that are firing, right? And then the loops of the Henle and things like that being shown. But remarkable. I sort of go through similar kinds of things where the entire thought process for me is very, very different in terms of what you have created. I am cognizant of time, and we would like to engage with all of you as well. So Priyanka, any final words on this before we open it up to the stage? All right. Any questions on what we've been going through so far?
No, I mean, in comics, in general, when the image is broken up into sub-images, you have the typical Z movement of the eye. So I was just curious, for this sort of a landscape paintings, what kind of did you find any patterns?
There wasn't any specific pattern like what you are pointing out, but the most amount of time was spent on the more salient features. So in that sense, Priyanka, you hit it on the nail. People were spending a lot of time in that, and the rest was actually just moving from one of the fine features to the other fine feature. There was no necessarily that Z pattern that you were seeing. No.
Yeah, what happens when there's no particular thing? No, but like the basic way that you will be scanning, even if something is not there, saliency plays a very important role. So even in this case also, it will be the competition between one to the other, that which is coming in, which is as of now striking and capturing your attention, and then you would go from one to the other. So if there would be no direction, because you have not been told about a particular task, and you're going by what is inviting to you more than the other.
Thanks. First of all, fantastic work, beautiful, beautiful work, both the artists. So I just have a question from you, sir. What I see in both of Priyanka's paintings, if you place a grid, there is microsymmetry, and then on a large it's asymmetric. So how does that influence the perception when you talk to people?
So that's a loaded question, because in some ways, depending upon where the eye is actually looking at, that part of the image is what's going to be appearing in the highest fidelity for you, right? So when let's say, for instance, if you choose that particular grid, right? So that's a nice symmetric structure. So if the brain is fixated, I mean, if the eye is fixated on that, then all the symmetric features on this is what's going to get processed, and then it sort of moves to another feature, and then it processes that. But bear in mind that if it has to recreate the entire scene, these things have to be stored in memory. So there is a very prominent thought process in the literature that we actually see the world through a series of eye movements. We are actually making these eye movements, it's like a jigsaw puzzle that we are adding up together, putting it all in short-term memory and piecing it together, and that's what you end up reconstructing the scene. I'm not sure I directly answered your question, but yeah.
So my question is related again to the eye movements. Like typically, how many passes does the eye do when looking at a scene? And is it like left to right? Is there a pattern to it at all?
Not for these sorts of movements, Ashish. There was no specific pattern that the eye followed. I mean, you will follow that pattern when you are looking at, let's say, Sameera's work, because you have to follow a certain sequence to understand the meaning of it. Your eyes will follow that. But for here, whatever the person is sort of processing in their mind, what is the next meaningful information is probably what it's going to do. Eye movements itself, just from a quick biology point of view, if you are stably looking at something, your eye is never at rest. You constantly sort of keep making these micro movements. That happens about 3 times a minute. 3 times a second, my bad, 3 times a second. So there is small fixations that keeps happening. But these are larger movements than that, and they will be very contextual.
No, so I think you have responded to that. I would bring the 2 point. One is the saliency that drives and captures. One of the basic principles with which we work, particularly when it is happening from the bottom-up processing, when the stimulus-driven capture of attention is happening. The other is when it goes, while I am doing this task or engaging with the painting, then I look for again something with more symmetry, because again that's related to the meaning I am striving for, and then I would go for something, first the saliency, and then I look at, okay, the symmetry is making sense, I could capture that. If it does not, it's very effortful, I go back to another. And I may come back to it, so there would be a zigzag scan that would happen, but it's also more to the bottom-up and the top-down processing, that the meaning-making process that I would indulge into. And the moment I have that, I arrive at that, then possibly I smoothly go to the another one.
Thank you. Sameera, question for you. So, nice sketches and great analysis, by the way, Dr. Shrikant. But question to you is that, have they been inspired by your work, or does it kind of go the other way also? Like, now that you know the science behind all this, like in your drawing, what shall I make today, Upma and all that, the lady has a weapon in her hand, correct? Does that make a difference? I mean, knowing all that you know now, that people are going to look at these things, so is that weapon more important? You would make sure that you would put something like that in your future things for people to kind of pay attention to, it could be a finger or something like that, right?
I get it.
But was it a conscious thing at that time when you did that, or it just happened as you do and now you're more conscious of such things?
It was definitely conscious. A lot of my work, so I come from a design background as well. I studied interior design. And the first thing we learn is the principles of design. And we take in a lot of things from different fields of art. Like I also learned photography, rule of thirds, and how the subject is placed in the canvas also matters a lot. So even with comics, it's the same. Like I also try to see from a reader's point, like where is the eye moving? And each panel is like a canvas to me. Each single rectangular frame of my artwork is a canvas. And I'm like, where is the eye focusing on? And even in the first train scene, if we can have that, can you just move to the
first slide? Pehla wala slide.
So here, in fact, realistically speaking, there are many mistakes in this picture. The railings in the train are usually higher. Like, how would we expect a person to go to the third berth if it's only till here, the second one? But I had to make a conscious choice there because of the comic panels in the first slide. So I didn't want them to interfere with the comic bubbles. So there are a lot of choices I have to make all the time when I'm drawing, even something that looks as simple as this. I do keep this in mind, probably not from a scientific perspective, but from a design perspective.
Would that influence your paintings now that we have gone through this? She's not a convert yet.
Hi, I loved both of your artworks, by the way. I'm going to go back. I'm not going to ask about science now. My question is for Priyanka ma'am. When you were making that, when I look at it, it reminds me of, I have studied biology in my school, so it reminds me of bioluminescence, or when you go underwater and there's these rocks and fish that shine. When you were painting that, you explained that this painting was a picture from your childhood when you had gone to a safari. I would like to know what was going on in your mind or heart when you were making that painting.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult because I've done a lot of other works after finishing this work, so I don't really have a great memory of what exactly I would be thinking at that point. But like you said, yeah. So again, like how Sir has pointed out, and also additional to that, I think every person perceives art very differently. So only when I tell them this was something like that, like I thought, then you would start thinking it like that. So I think the beauty of art is that, so it's open to a lot of perspectives, right? And everybody has a different perspective, yet very interesting. But when I tell them the story behind it, probably you start looking at it from that angle. So, but a common thing that in one of my recent solo shows was a lot of people were actually trying to think it could be above the sea level or below the sea level, which is a very interesting point again. So, for me, again, it's above the sea level. It's not, I mean, I'm a total water person, but the imagery that I do was not really, very aquatic. But I do take inspiration from very popular films like, I really forgot, but what was that? What was that? Avatar, yeah, thank you. So there was after watching that film, subconsciously, I did a lot of paintings with blue background. So, but I was again very rigid to say that was below sea level. For me, it's always above sea level. Probably it is also the things that I've missed seeing, So a lot of things has changed in decades, right? Like every 5 years, the surroundings around you change. So when I was a child where I was brought up, there were a lot of things in social perspective that were not there in the next 2-3 years. The trees were all cut up. The dividers are like 2-3 kilometers ahead. There were no trees. So I think all of these socio-political elements are also playing a major role in my work. But again, the beautification of art is what I'm interested in. So yeah.
No, thank you so much, but we've now completely run out of time. So we are around, you can have those questions later. Thank you so much all of you. Thank you so much. It's a fantastic session. Really got us thinking. Thank you artists also for bringing your art here and for all the time that you spent with us. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody.